Welcome to the gig. I'm Johnny O, and today I want to talk about Microsoft Active Directory and Directory Services. What is it? So, they just call it Active Directory for short, or AD. When someone says AD, they're talking about Active Directory. Now, Active Directory is actually amazing technology. It comes from Novell networking software, originally. So, what it is it's the file permissions and hardware permissions, and how your servers and your PCs handle your account information and all the resources on that computer, like files and everything. So I just want to go into the history of it so everyone can completely understand it. Active Directory comes from LDAP, which is Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. Back in the 60s and 70s, maybe even in the 90s, we used to get something called phone books. I'm sure they're still around, but every year, everybody in the city where you lived would get a big, thick phone book. We had white pages and yellow pages. Yellow pages were commercial, and white pages were residential phone numbers. You could find every phone number in the city in that phone book. How they organized these phone books was on these old rudimentary databases back in the 70s and 80s. And they managed them on Unix systems, and it was called Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. That's what they used to organize phone books. That's where it came from. So in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, Novell NetWare was a really famous company. They used to have red boxes, and whenever in the late 80s, early 90s, even mid-90s, you went into a computer store, you would see Novell boxes. They were just as dominant as Microsoft boxes. The Microsoft boxes with Windows in them were blue. The Novell boxes were red. Now, what Novell allowed computers, it didn't matter what computer it was, to be networked. It was the middleware. They called it middleware. For all networks, corporate networks, business networks, home networks, you could use Novell. And what it did is it networked everything. It even had its own set of protocols called IPX, SPX. They were so dominant at one point, even the original Doom from 1993 didn't run on TCP/IP. It ran on a Novell protocol called IPX, SPX. And that was Novell. And if you think about it, even the word NIC, N-I-C, Network Interface Card, that is a Novell term. That's Novell terminology. Even the standard for modern network interface cards, network cards, came from Novell. So they did standardize networking to a point. Another thing they did, when you loaded this on your machine, what it gave you was Active Directory. And it was Novell Active Directory. And it was a little bit crazy. So when you look at Active Directory, Microsoft Active Directory, you can right-click on a file. Yeah? Any file on your computer. And if you're logged in as admin, you'll probably have full access. And you can do anything to this file. But you'll see a list of permissions. You know, there's about a dozen of them. Read, write, write only, read only. There's about a dozen of them. But if that was Novell, you would have, 50 different permissions. And it was a little bit ridiculous in a way that after 5 o'clock, this person can access that file type of ridiculousness. Or only on Sundays, that was a checkbox you could click. That only on Sundays, Jerry could access this file. Sundays between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock. Just insanity that just didn't need to be there. So it was a little bit more complicated than it needed to be for Active Directory. Now, in 2000, Windows 2000, Microsoft implemented their own Active Directory called Active Directory and Directory Services. The first iteration of this was in Windows 2000, released in 1999. Now, they had been working on it for years, and the way they worked on it is very interesting. They took a handful of Novell programmers. In fact, the same programmers that developed Novell's Active Directory for their NetWare. And they said to them, if you could do this again, how would you do it? some of the responses were, well, when we did this, there was a lot of business guys involved. So they made a lot of requirements that shouldn't actually be in Active Directory. It was just ridiculous. So it worked, and they got away with it, and Novell was very popular. All businesses had Novell. But their Active Directory was pretty bloated. And what these guys said, it was bloated because as they were developing it in the early 90s, a lot of business guys got involved, you know? And you could share out, for example, you could share out the monitor on your computer. You could share out, say, the A drive or between a certain time or something like that. Really weird permissions that shouldn't be there, that some, business guy thought should be there. And so Microsoft said, if you could do it again and we give you design, the design, and leave the design entirely up to you, would you do that for us? We'll actually make you millionaires if you do this, and it's successful. And so they went ahead and did it, and they spent a lot of time on it, and they did a really great job. And when they released Windows 2000, a big part of Windows 2000, going from Windows NT to Windows 2000, was Active Directory and directory services. Windows 2000 was the desktop version of Windows NT. So the desktop version also had, and all your desktop versions from XP to Millennium to Windows 10 all have Active Directory in them. That's what makes them unique. And what happened was these guys did such a great job. I'm sure they're millionaires to this day. Novell is out of business. They only went out of business a few years ago, but they were really dominant back in the day. I actually didn't like their software, although you had to know how to use it. To be an admin or IT staff, you had to know Novell. That's just part of it. Now, it was bloated and more complicated than it needed to be. Now, Microsoft has done an amazing job with Active Directory and directory services. All Windows machines are based on AD. The organization of your files and file locations, all the resources, it's all managed by Active Directory. There's two permission levels, though. There's hardware permission levels, and there's logical permission levels. So, for example, if you click on your hard drive, and you right-click it, and you say, share out this hard drive, and you make a network share. So you say, okay, Roy can use this hard drive, like an account named Roy at nowhere.com. Can use this, someone who has a login. So when you log into your computer, you're Roy, you have permission to use this hard drive, even though it's not your computer. So when I log into my computer, obviously I log in as administrator. So all the drives and everything on my computer, I have administrative access. But if you have, say, a daughter or a cousin visiting from out of town and you want to let them use your computer, but you don't want them to have access to all your files and allow them to install stuff on your computer, you just make them a regular user account. And they don't have all those permissions. They don't have administrative rights on your computer. They have a regular Joe Blow user account. They can't install it. They can use everything on there. They can't install anything or make any major changes. And that's Active Directory that allows that. But there's also hardware level permissions. Like for your hard drive, mainly, your drives mostly, is you have to allow that drive to be shared out for Active Directory to apply permissions to it. And where those permissions are applied are on the file system. So when you right-click on a hard drive, or you go into the Drive Manager in Windows, the Drive Manager, and the permissions that you apply there are hardware-level permissions. They must be permitted. You must have that drive shared out for someone else to use that. Active Directory will do that automatically on a very low level, but if you don't want anyone using it, using your computer at all, you can lock them out on the hardware level. What Active Directory does is it organizes everything on your computer in a hierarchical structure so the admin can access everything. And you'll notice with these servers and everything, you might have a backup administrator. You might have a power user. The difference between the administrator and the power user is the administrator can do anything, even create another administrator account. A power user can do everything an administrator can do, except create another administrator account. That's the biggest difference. Now, you can go all the way down to this guy can only use this file on this computer. Right? That's Active Directory that allows you to do that. So you can see how important it is in a server environment where you have 10 servers with all different resources on them. You can share out this drive to sales department. You can share out, this entire server to the marketing department, and that's where all their stuff goes. It works with everything across the board. Doesn't matter if it's your programs on your computer, your files on your computer, your drives on your computer. It can all be shared out through Active Directory. You share out your printer on your computer, that's Active Directory that does that. I know it's a wizard, right? And would you like to share this computer? And you go through the wizard and you share it out. You might not see it, but that wizard is just manipulating Active Directory, so you're able to do that. It'll apply share permissions to different groups or users on your computer or on your network. That's all part of it. So if you're ever an administrator on a Windows certification program, a big part of that certification program will be Active Directory and directory services. This is how you share out all the resources on your computer and control, all the resources for security purposes, just for privacy purposes, or just for general convenience. Active Directory does all that. So it's more than just a lightweight directory access protocol. They took it and just blew it out. And these guys from Novell that they hired at Microsoft to implement this did a really great job. And, the proof was in the pudding. And where's Novell now? Well, they're gone. And they were around for years. I mean, they were on their deathbed for 20 years as far as I was concerned. They were taking a long time to go out of business. So they might have had, some assets or something like this, or some copyrights or something that kept them going for so long. But I think around the time when Microsoft introduced Windows 2000, they were still growing strong at every company. They're gone now, and I think the reason that they're gone is their Active Directory was the first implementation of something we can call Active Directory, but it wasn't very good. Microsoft did a better job, and that's why they rule the roost. Okay, I'm Johnny O, and this is The Gig. Don't forget to leave your questions and comments below, subscribe, and share.